Welcome to the Week 3 Top 120 show. So, the Top 120 leaderboard. This is a metric that I've come up with where each week the top ranked player of the week will get 120 points, and this is then scaled down to the 120th best player receiving 1 point. Outside the top 120, you receive 0 points. So if you don't play or you just have a really bad week, you get 0 points for that week. This metric aims to do a few things. First of all, we're penalising players that don't participate well in head-to-head weeks. So this is missing games or weeks through injury, or they're sitting out back-to-backs, or they just have really bad weeks. The next one that it does is it caps a bad week at 0 and a good week at 120. A bad week, it's a bad week, it happens and it moves on. And in a head-to-head matchup, you lose that 1 week, but again, you move on, the scores reset, and that's it. And it also caps a good week at 120, and that's important on the idea that in category head-to-head leagues, all you need to do is beat your opponents by 1 point in each category. For example, if your opponent scores 500 points for the week, you only need 501 points. If you have 800 points, you beat them, but those 800 points aren't needed. And it's the same thing here. Next, it will let us track some important players like Kawhi and Embiid who have load management happening. And I think this is important because once we keep going through this and analyzing how it goes this season, we'll then be able to take that into account and try and apply our learnings to next season when we're considering either load management or players that are beginning the season injured, because this is the same idea. I think at the end of the season, the good teams in each league will have more of these players than worse teams. And that's because this list aims to determine who the good, consistent, high-performing weekly players are. Finally, it is somewhat schedule dependent. So if a player has a lot of two-game weeks, they will do a little bit worse, and maybe that's offset in the schedule by having a 5-game week, and they get that week really strong, but then they get maybe 0 points in the 2-game week. And I think this is important because it can be considered in the draft. The schedule is released, you can look at the players. Again, a lot of people say it's insignificant, and maybe it is. That's what we're looking to determine. I think Denver has already had 2. Does that then penalize them? And they actually struggle, those Denver players. So yeah, we'll follow that as well. Moving on, ignore the graphic, I will have that fixed for next week, but this is 1 to 30. So I'm doing 1 to 120, and I'm doing that in 4 groups of 30. The first one, I want to mention 17 of the top 20 from week 3 are on this page. So that is the week 3 top 20 players. You can see their score is over 100, and they're on this page. So the top players are getting it done. They're still around the top. Early in the season, because there's a small sample size, big weeks really push you up. It's a third of your score. So if you have 1/3 of your score being really big, then yeah, you get onto this front page in our top 120 leaderboard. And the final overall point I want to talk about before I get to players is the top 30 cutoff. So the cutoff of points required. Again, you don't lose points throughout the season, you only accumulate. And the cutoff after week 3 is 225 points with Jarrett Allen down there. James Harden. Harden was drafted about the end of the first round in 12-team leagues, and he's currently sitting as the 3rd best player in this metric. And I think that's because he's had a lot of consistent games. They haven't blown people away, but he's consistently getting those counting stats, has been getting some more defensive stats, and that consistency has landed him at number 3. Maybe even more surprising is Derek White. He's hit a bunch of threes, a bunch of points, really good free throw, and it's been really consistent, good percentages, and that's landed him in 6th place. I think that is really good value for anyone that's picked up Derek White. We'll be able to follow him in the next few weeks to see if he can keep it up, or if some of those big names behind him are able to overtake. But at the moment, fantastic start from Derek White. That's 3 really consistent weeks to start the season. The next are there, Nikola Vucevic. He's been playing crazy good. A lot of people think that he was getting older, but he's been able to put 3 really good weeks. And again, anybody on this page with that score up around 300, that is 3 strong weeks. And that's important from these players like Vucevic because it's showing that there is consistency. Maybe it isn't just first 2 weeks going crazy. So it'll be interesting to see Vucevic as well. Finally, at the bottom, Chet Holmgren. He started the season really well, but got hurt and was going to be out 8 to 10 weeks. Week 3, he got 30 points, and I think because he missed 1 game. But moving forward, he's going to get 8 weeks without getting any more points. At the moment, 226. He's above that cutoff for the first page here, but he's going to start shifting down and maybe out of the top 120 as those lower end people score more and more points and push that cutoff value up. The next one is the 31 to 60. A few interesting things here is only 4 players on this page scored less than 5 points. So most of these guys have been pretty consistent, but yeah, 4 of them were outside the top 120, either from being injured or just having a bad week. This page in particular, I think there is a lot of movement happening. 50% have had a rank change, plus or minus of 20 spots. And I think that's a factor of the low sample size in the season, where players either had a really strong week and they've shot up the rankings, or they had a really strong week 1 or 2 and then they've fallen off and they've really jumped down the rankings. So currently this one in week 3 has been all about people jumping, shifting up and down. And then finally the top 60 cutoff is 137 points. So that's 90 or so less between the first page. So yeah, pay attention to that as well, and that'll be going up each week. Now, the stars that I want to talk about. Jalen Johnson. He had a pretty rough first couple of games and people were concerned about where he was, but he's currently sitting probably a bit above his ADP at 34. And I think that consistency, if he continues to play at this level and grow, we'd expect him to push up onto that front page, especially once injured players do fall down. In the middle there, Kobe White and Jakob Poeltl. They were both middle to late end guys from the draft. They've had a couple of really good weeks and consistent weeks. Podol, I think he was maybe underrated, but he's got the center role locked down in Toronto. There have been a few people out, but I don't think that's going to affect him too much. And then Kobe White's interesting that he's able to be a top 40 player so far in the season because there's a lot of guards in Chicago and that makes them all need to share points, share rebounds. But Kobe White is currently getting it done on this metric. Finally, Dyson Daniels down at 52. So Dyson's been getting a lot of attention for his defensive stats, his steals, his blocks. Just recently, he's been able to get a few more points, which is good. Free throws have been bad, but what I want to point out about Dyson is he's sitting here 52nd player on the year, but he didn't play very much in week 2. He might have got one game and then got hurt and then sat out a handful of games. And that really is punishing in this metric because week 2 he would have scored 0 points. So I think to be back as the 52nd player is really strong from Dyson. Moving on to the next one. This one is 61 to 90, and I think this one has some pretty interesting combinations of players. So the first one is having one good week, and that being week 3. So that's your Brandon Miller and your Dante DiVincenzo down the bottom. You see their total score is 96 and 95, and for week 3 they scored 96 95. So these are the players. There's a couple more here where they've been pretty much non-existent the first few weeks, but then they had a really strong week 3, and that's pushed them up into this range. It's not enough to keep up with the consistent players, but it's able to get them 60th to 90th. The next one is the people that had a really good hot start and then fell off due to either injury or playing poorly. Zach LaVine and Ja Morant, I believe they're both to injury. But yeah, they had a hot start, 132, 126 points respectively, but that's come down because not playing punishes you really hard in this metric. And it's important because it is costing those teams wins early in the season. Yes, in head-to-head when they come back, you'll be able to win later. But at the moment, it's really hurting those managers. And then the final kind of player in this range, I think, are solid players that have had a couple of low production weeks. Chris Paul and Lou Dort. Last week, I think 27 points for Chris Paul and 37 for Lou Dort. And that makes sense because they're sitting around 130, 90 points, so it's about a third of their score. I'm surprised to not see more players like this, but there are some people that kind of should be in this range, right? We do expect those players, if that's where they end up at the end of the season, to consistently be getting these 60th to 90th in the week scores, and so they should end up here. The final one, going all the way down to 120, the first thing to note is 16 of the 30 players, so over 50%, scored 0 points. So that means that week 3, they were outside the top 120. Either they didn't play at all, or they had not enough production to crack that top 120. Which means for a weekly changes league, they were not worth the starting spot. They probably should have been benched. The top 120 cutoff is 46 points. We spoke about Chet Holmgren on 226. We'll see as he pushes down the list in those 8 to 10 weeks, whether this top 120 cutoff can grow fast enough to push Chet out, or if we see it actually starting to slow down in growth now, which then allows Chet to stay within this range. Back to the other dot point, 5-star players. So the ones that all have a star here that I'm going to talk about briefly are players that I think are in the top 40, those really top echelon fantasy players, and they're currently sitting rosterable, but not great for what we're expecting. Some of that's injury, but let's look at them now. Tyrese Maxey, he got hurt. but only 88 points. So he didn't have great weeks before he got hurt, potentially because of his field goal percentage and free throw percentage a little bit holding him back, as well as not many defensive stats. Desmond Bain has got hurt, and Jalen Brunson, he has not been playing well at all. I think maybe it's just a bit of a slow start into the season, but and now he's ramping up. You can see 74 points in week 3, but with the Knicks time shared, you can see Mikal Bridges just below him. Jalen Brunson, maybe he's a bust. Maybe he's not that top pick that we expected him to be just at the moment. Scotty Barnes down at 110. He's been injured, so that's fine, honestly. And then Paul George missed the first couple of weeks, but then in week 3, he was able to sneak in with 47 points, and we expect him to start scoring a little bit more. So we'll see Paul George push up. Finally, on this page, I want to say, each week, this final graph, I'm going to be saying who the star players are so that we can pay attention to who those top echelon guys are that shouldn't be here, but on the season currently are. Moving on, I want to have a look at what it looks like at the end of week 3 from a distribution point of view. First of all, at the top, Jokic and Tatum actually look like pretty clear outliers at the moment. And that's because not only have they got the top 20 each week, but they've been in that real top 5 kind of players, and that's allowed them to push up well past 300. And there's a pretty significant drop off. The next drop off I want to talk about is after 15 players, there's another drop of about 15 points, I think, and we don't see another drop this big for the rest of the data. So I think that's a really interesting one to notice too. I'm not sure how that's going to look as we move across the season, but I do expect that within that top echelon of players, we will start to see some more clear drops, and then once we get to the middle portion, more of a smooth distribution going down. The next one is that cutoff at 46. I think it's surprising. I probably would have expected the cutoff to be a little bit lower. A handful of people scoring 5 to 1 point each week. These low scores adding up. In a perfect world with 120 players, the cutoff would be at 3, with the last place person getting 1 each week. But 46 is quite high, and I think that could be challenging for some people to break in. I would expect that cutoff to actually slow down as we get more weeks into the season, where it will grow each week, but I expect the growth of it to slow down. And especially if that cutoff's at 120, it's going to be really hard for a random player off the waiver wire to actually jump in and push more people down. That's it for the episode. Hopefully this is a good one. You can see it's the green slideshow, which is going to be the top 120 throughout the season. Please comment any feedback you've got, and subscribe for more analysis. And we'll have a look at the top 120 after week 4 shortly. Thanks everyone. See ya.